Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
Hello. On today's episode of Careers Unwrapped, we're joined by Andrew Barnabas, known as Barn. He's a very distinguished composer whose creativity spans not just TV and film, but also very much gaming. So with a foundation in classical music, but also a flair for incorporating genres like funk and disco, he's become synonymous with groundbreaking scores in the gaming world, such as the MediEvil series and also the BAFTA-nominated Primal. Now, beyond gaming, he's left his mark on the film landscape as well in the form of award-winning 80s synth-driven score for Green Street 3 and the critically acclaimed soundtrack for the Netflix documentary Hating Peter Tatchell. Today, Barn continues to be a pivotal figure in the dynamic intersection of music and media, and hopefully we'll find out more about his career and what he's learned from that. So welcome, Barn.
Thank you very much for that very wonderful introduction.
Let's take it right back to the beginning then. What inspired you first of all to pursue a career in music competition, particularly in the realms of TV, film and interactive media? Where did the spark come from?
I had a very positive history of me. At a very young age 7, I was enrolled in the youngest member of Croydon Computer Club, and I was given piano lessons. The next 10 years I spent learning a lot of non-musical instruments, went to musical school, and spending all of my free time as a nerd in the computer room at school. I went to a private boys' school. My teenage years were barren of any female attention whatsoever. My highlight of my social life was going to a mate's house to play his computer. But I stumbled into what was called the demo scene, which is back in the Commodore 64 and Amiga days. This was sort of a group of mostly young people. Generally, originally it started through illegal distributing games, but it developed into people using their skills as programmers, artists, and musicians to produce what I can best describe as a real-time music video. People would throw things around the screen with lovely artwork and lovely code, and I would do the music for it. This developed into a network, a proper kind of a scene all around Europe, most predominantly, of not like-minded individuals. And I started going along to networks. This is way before the internet. So largely to meet up with people and share stuff. I started having competitions. And whilst I entered competitions, there were people there from the games industry. And I was fortunate enough to do well in a couple of competitions. And someone said to me, who were in the games industry, you should think about doing music for games. Have you ever thought of doing that? I'm like, I'm 16 years old. No, I have not. But it did give me the impetus to go and think, well, why not? What's worse that can happen? As being an enterprising individual, I rang up every company which advertised in the magazines I used to read at the time and just said to them, who does music for your game? I got the traditional, put something on file, we'll send it to you, don't call us, we'll call you. And but at that time there were a couple of trade shows, so I would then go along to trade shows, suited and booted to try and get free tickets and look important, and go around and just introduce myself to various companies. And one particular company looked at my badge and the name I'd made up on my badge and said to us, me and my friend, what can you do for us? And I said, I would do music for games, which I'd never done a music for game at that point. But they asked me for a business card and a show reel. I didn't have either. I didn't actually know to honest. I didn't even know what a show reel was at those days. And but again, this just snowballed. And so I went home that night, went to the show the following day, and then walked around with a very different attitude towards each of the companies and said, let me give us your details. I'll start sending you music. And like anything in the creative, I would say anything really working in the creative field, timing plays an enormously important part. One company rang me up about 2 weeks after I'd been to this show and said, we're looking for music for our new game. Can you come and, sorry, that's drilling in the background. My neighbour's having drilling at the moment. Can you come and come in and play some of your work? I did that. Cut a long story short, I was very nervous. My mum got me a really embarrassing piano tie. And then, yes, I landed the gig to score my first game based on some music I'd written for this Amiga demo scene. Fortunately for me, the game like anything else, you're only as successful as the product you're attached to. This game turned out to be number one for 3 months. And then so from February 1991, I'd made my mark.
And so that start out, you make it sound, you say at the end, timing matters a lot in that, but there's clearly also a hell of a lot of hard graft there. There's a lot of networking as well. There's a lot of putting yourself out there and taking risks to get going. Now, today, as somebody who actually is considerably more established, obviously, in the business, if someone's younger and thinking, that's it, I love gaming, I love music, I've got a talent, I want to head in that direction, what's going to be different for someone starting today than from when you did?
It's on one hand, it's much, much easier. On the other hand, it's much, much harder. One hand, the first hand was because we had the internet. You could simply Google. And then I had to literally go through phone books and magazines and just make phone calls. There wasn't even an email at the time. Yes, you're right. I had to write, originally I was writing letters with attached floppy disks of my music at the past and saying, could you please listen to me and let me know? And 99% of the time you wouldn't get a response. But the flip side is, the downside of that is, if you can do it, if everyone else can Google this, then there's going to be everyone else, there's so much more competition. And I was lucky enough that when I first kind of landed my projects in the games industry, the gaming landscape was very different than it is now. Now we've got your consoles, your PCs, your mobile and everything else. And it's a lot easier to write music as well. That also became a sort of interesting point where the technology and the technical ability that we needed to write music was very different then. I had to write music using the capabilities of the sound chip on the device I was working. I couldn't just go into a studio and play a few synths and samplers or record a voice and turn it into a track and go, here's my track for a game. The music had to be generated by the sound chip of the computer itself. So that made it much more technical. And I was fortunate that those days, it was so technical that a lot of the people involved, a lot of musicians were too kind of fearful of the technology. So a lot of people who were involved in doing it were more like they were programmers or artists who used to play the violin or whatever instrument. They were very young. So they were technical first and musical second. I was fortunate. I had equal. I had spent many years learning to play computers and many years learning to do music in tandem. So that gave me a heads up. So from that perspective, it was an easier sell, and there were less people doing. So this market was much smaller, and the competition was much.
So just going a bit further into the competitive nature of it, because you've mentioned there both about it being easier and harder now. Easier because of tech, because of access, because of information, but also harder because of it being more competitive in a way. But in such a market where it is known, music known for being very, very competitive, what strategies have you actually used in recent years to continue to stay relevant and to find new opportunities?
Interesting enough, I would say it's surprisingly similar to what it was 30 years ago when I first started, in the fact that like anything else, you have to ask yourself, why would a company use you? Why would you, when there were thousands of other composers out there, what do you bring to the table which is unique? 30 odd years ago, I brought the fact that I was musical and technical. That is still relevant now. If you're an aspiring composer who likes to work in games, people ask me this all the time. What do I suggest? And I say, well, learn the technical side, because it's just as important now. Whereas in the gaming world back then, music for games was largely superficial word. I think of it as all icing on a visual cake, where you would have maybe a title music, maybe a bit of music while you're running around or whatever level, a bit of game, a few bits of music. These days, especially with the complexity of the games, the music can be so much more involved. And the technology increased so much in the last few years. Basically, they want your interactive movies. And what does a movie do, which a game doesn't do? Well, basically a game before would never react to what the player was doing. Because the key bit there was how, like when you watch any great film and a game, how does a bit of computer code know what I'm feeling and provide me with music which matches my sense of emotion? The obvious thing in a game is that, imagine you're walking around a level and you're getting swarmed by enemies. You're going to be quite stressed. And therefore you can use little simple ideas like how much health I have left and develop based on that flag, give me more intense music. At the same time, I could be walking around beautiful scenery and I just want something which looks beautiful to accompany that. So the music has to be far more interactive and reactive to what people are doing, which is much more technical.
And perhaps if we can get a little further into creative process, because I was really interested looking through and listening to a number of the excerpts that you've got on your website, both from the games, but also from the movies, and in particular around the movie Hating Peter Tatchell, where you wrote in there about how you picked out militant themes from the story and then used that as inspiration for the music. So where does it start with, let's say, a game from you're first told this is the game we want you on through to it actually being completed? What are your stages in that process?
It's in many ways it is. It's far more complicated than it is to doing any film or TV show. The simple reason is anything linear, I'll say not which is the game, it generally has to be, it's got to be shot. It's got to be shot and edited and put in front of you as a bit of footage for future music. With a game, you're not quite sure where that footage is going to be. Because depending on the kind of game you're doing, a game could be more linear, i.e. you're just going straight from A to B, and there are no options along the way. Or you could be a completely open, free world environment where you could go left, right, center, up and down, and again, having to deliver music which caters for each scenario. So the complexity and the kind of Venn diagram of options gets quantifiably more difficult depending on the style of game you asked to do. So from that perspective, I know one thing I've always said, that the difference between game audio and TV and film audio is it's not post-production. There are technical requirements which have to be thought of whilst making the game. Quite often in the past I would come and go, like, you're going through left to right. I'm going for a different end to a different area of the game here. I need to have different music to cater for it. Oh no, but we don't know. The audio code doesn't know that you've gone, and therefore, because the artist didn't flag that environment as different, so that we can't tell that. And so you want to avoid the frustration of not being able to deliver that. At the same time, you have to make sure that the resources are allocated. There's enough storage space on the game itself. There's enough RAM so you can play all the music and switch between different states all in real time. So there are lots of different things to consider from a technical perspective before you even get to the creativity. And the creativity can be more, sometimes I'm simply sent a description of a character, a description of a story. Because game development is something which kind of all comes together at the end. Pacing and storyline, and even to the point how many levels you've got to play, can all be tweaked right up until the last moment. And so it's a little bit of a rush to the finish, because I wanted to make sure that I'm delivering music which supports that, but the gameplay can be tweaked and changed right up to the 11th hour.
And
so,
do you find this quite a solo process? Are you on your own the whole way through this, or is it more collegiate? Are you feeling part of a team?
Part of a team is generally what I would prefer to be. Being parts, it's never quite so fun to be so remote from the process. In the past, I used to be literally saying, God, I was going back to the 90s, I'd be setting VHSs of games in development. Hi, here's a level of a game, do some music for it. And it felt like it's kind of proverbial black wall, just throwing a bit of music over the top. Whereas now, I much prefer to be part of the team, because there are so many factors which require me to think, well, can I do that? Can I do that? Can I do that? One thing I love about it is it's that mixture of creativity and the tech, which is it's unlike any other industry. So a lot of it is problem solving. I want the player to feel sad here for whatever reason. How can I deliver this with various code constraints around me? And at the same time, I have to be realistic of the amount of music that I need to read, because you could do hours and hours and hours of music on a game. A film is only going to be generally a couple of hours. Same with TV show. You know the length. You know that you're never going to need to do more than X. But you can be iterating and doing and working on a game for years and years. I mean, a couple of games I've done over 4 hours of music, and some of the games, and then you add the complexity of interactivity, where the music has to change depending on what the player was doing. For example, if you and I played a game and it took me 10 minutes to get from the start of a level to the end of a level, and then kill a boss, for example, it might take you longer, it might take you shorter. The music we both have to have the same feeling at the end of it. And what happens if both of us get towards the boss and we get killed? We don't want to hear the same musical experience the second time around. So it has to vary on a timeline vertically as well as horizontally. I could go into very much.
It sounds fascinating. So what projects have you got on at the moment? What's in the pipeline?
The problem at the moment, actually, it's more film and TV at the moment. I'm working on a feature film at the moment, and I've done a couple of shorts, and I worked on 2 feature films and 2 TV shows last year. My last game I did was a couple of years ago, Formula One manager. But yes, since then I've mostly worked on TV and.
So at any one point in time, from a career perspective, because obviously one of the things that perhaps young musical talents are facing as challenges, am I going to be able to turn this into a career? Am I going to be able to earn money from it, quite frankly, or is it just going to stay as a passion through my life? So when you're working on these projects at the moment, who are your employers? Are they film studios or are they music companies? Who do you work for?
It does generally depend. On a film, on a TV show, I'm generally working for a production company, which would largely be, it's through experience. I might have met a producer I'm working on X. They tend to always be reasonably short form. They will then go and work for another company and they'll say, we're looking for music, and they'll ask you to come and either pitch on the show or they'll just ask you to do the project. With a game, yes, it's either games companies can go from 1 or 2 man kind of indie outfits to teams of hundreds and sometimes even thousands of people. So the budgets of all these things can vary enormously. Some of the budgets of some of the big games now are matching the budgets of big Hollywood, say Marvel movies. So yes, the number of people involved, can be similar amounts.
So you mentioned pitching there, and that I'm interested in, because let's put a scenario here that I'm producing a movie, a London-based gangster pick, because I see you've done the music for some movies in that area, but also Midsummer Night's Dream, so you can do all things. But if I'm seeking you to pitch, what are you expected to produce? How much effort are you putting in to a pitch to try and win the work of doing the whole movie score?
It can be a lot. It can be, sometimes you can spend weeks, if not months, on doing a pitch. And the problem with pitching, I've never really liked pitching, but I understand it's the nature of the beast. If everyone has different taste in music, and they want to make sure that you are the right person for the job. The downside is that you will have, if you've written and directed the film, whatever, you've lived with this project for sometimes years. You know what you want, or especially more importantly, you know what you don't want. I'm coming in completely fresh from cold, but I might simply have either a short sequence of the film to score, which is in a basic unfinished form, or just literally a page of text and maybe a picture of an actor. And so I have to elicit what I think is my musical idea from that. And it's, as you say, it's a bit of it's the luck of the draw when you get to these things. I can say that there was a very, very successful TV show which came out a couple of months ago, which we sadly didn't win. But they hadn't, when we spent 3 or 4 months pitching on it, but they hadn't even cast the main actors. They hadn't shot a single shot any of the script. And it was simply a script written by a very, very successful comedian. And we were very lucky to get as close as we did. But it was at that point, it's the luck of the draw at that point.
Yeah, I in my business's day job, we have to pitch a lot to large businesses, to marketing teams or corporate responsibility or HR and recruitment teams. And sometimes you go into those and you just think, hang on, this is a really good vibe between us and them, and you think this could work well. Other times, all the work you've put in, you go into the room and within minutes, they're not going to choose us. They've got a direction in their mind, but they can't articulate it. And they're already deciding that we're not it.
Yeah.
As you say, sometimes they know what they don't want, even if they can't explain it to you. And I think that's actually an interesting direction to talk about briefly, which is the intersection between musical talent and actually making a living, having a business, a career in this. So you must see through your work and through people reaching out to you, a lot of younger people trying to start their musical careers, and they may have the talent, but what are the skills they've got to develop outside of the musical talent in order to actually be able to make a living from this?
Oh yeah, you're right. There were lots of things there. I mean, I would I've given a fair few talks to academia, and quite often I've come across companies and institutions which they don't seem to have taught. My bottom line is, you are, as a creative, whenever you go and study your creative craft, whether it be art, music, whatever, you're spending all your time learning the art of the craft. What you're not doing is spending your time learning how to run a business. And it is actually, I would say, almost in many cases, at least 50-50. Some cases, it's actually more. Yes, you need more of your business skill set you do of your creative skill set. Learning to negotiate contracts, learning to understand the various legalities of music and intellectual property and law and rights and royalties and everything else, and how to approach companies. I get asked at least a couple of times a month. People are offering to work with me, and you're right, most of them are of the younger generation. But people who approach me, and some of them have done their homework. They've written very, very beautifully worded emails. They've talked about what projects they've work on, and you look, you feel like impressed. But so many, sadly, do not. The classic one is opening with "Hi there." Don't even put your name. Then you want to work in something, and you've got spelling mistakes in the email, and you think, and by the bottom of the email, you read everything, and I respond to everything. I've decided I would never consider working with this person because they presented themselves so badly. So back in the day, yes, I had to write physical letters and print them out, put them in the post. You wouldn't dream of doing that if you had full of typos and spelling mistakes in it. You'd do all your homework properly before you did that. But with blanket emails and just Googling companies these days, it's very, very easy to do. But the problem, what they don't think, is that by presenting themselves so poorly, if I was to employ them, would they present themselves so poorly on my behalf, which would reflect poorly on me. It's irrespective of the quality of the work that they've delivered. If they've got shown no care and attention in how it's presented, that's a really bad thing. And it's incredible. It just doesn't cross their mind.
And that attention to detail obviously matters not just hugely to you, but it matters to so many potential either employers or partners as well. And you mentioned the business side of things there, but also, I guess, linked to what you said about pitching, everybody who wants to develop a creative career has got to be a salesperson as well, because you are constantly selling yourself, you're selling your work, your product. Is that something you think came naturally to you, or have you learned from fails along the way?
Oh, I've definitely, I think, I'll be honest and say, hopefully a little bit of both. People have said that I'm quite chatty. I think why people ask me to do some public speaking for them, because I am quite unafraid of standing in front of groups of people and talking about this. And I'm not afraid to say it as it is. I'll be honest, when you talk about my career in games, it was through games that we end up getting into film and TV. It wasn't something ever particularly I had planned to do. A lot of it had come from people who had played games in the 90s, growing up and working in film and TV, remembering that score, getting in touch with us saying, would you like to do that? We sort of just stumbled into by accident. But when we first tried to get into it myself, I failed completely in the mid-noughties because of the simple reason that I ascribed the same business model and mentality that I'd learned from 10, 15 years in games at that point to film and TV. And actually, they are very, very different businesses. Simply, the games industry came from the bedroom. Mostly younger kids, programming away, and it just grew into this corporate behemoth, the likes of the big publishers getting involved, and became a big industry. Whereas film and TV came from theatre. So the attitude towards how people approach looking for composers is very, very different. Despite the fact that I might be using the same software, I might be delivering the same type of files, the attitude towards what people think of the importance of music in many ways is hugely different. So, and it was only when I had this luck of getting contacted by other people that it really helped us get into it. Also, it was a bit of a paradigm shift. Whereas in the mid-noughties, when we first tried to do this, games were generally regarded as a kind of the Paul Weaker cousin of film and TV. Film has always seemed to be the kind of the pinnacle of the creative sound to picture kind of collaboration. But something happened around the late noughties where games suddenly became cool to people who weren't really involved in the game. So while I would, in the past, sort of underplay my background in games, I came to the point where actually I'd shout above the rooftops about it. And I was surprised just how many people who'd worked on film and TV had played some of the games I'd written 30 odd years ago.
And so there's a lot more crossover now between TV and film and gaming than there was before. So a lot more understanding and respect as well, because I remember as well, gaming being looked down on very much as not really being an art form to begin with. And now, partly driven by the quality of the product, but also money, there's a lot more respect from the TV and film side across to what gaming is, both as a business and a creative product as well. And in therefore the variety of work that you've done, and it might be hard to pick something out, but I really want to know what are the bits where you sort of really high five yourself and say that I'm really proud of. I love that work.
Oh, that's a good question. There are a few times where it's happened. The obvious one for me is being involved in the PlayStation franchise called MediEvil, for the simple reason that there were 4 games and I was involved in every single one of them. So the opportunity to come back and revisit a score written in 1998, 21 years later for the PlayStation 4, with all the bells and whistles that's from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 4, which you can do now, was like a creative dream come true. To do everything which I ever thought would possible, and now could do that, and given the opportunity to be able to tell my 1998 self that I could do that, would have been they would have not believed me. So yes, you're absolutely right. There are a number of highlights. I would say Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm doing some show work on that at the moment. Particularly proud of that work. I'm particularly actually proud of a TV show I worked on called Dead Pixels. And yeah, there were a number of things. I would say a game I worked on called Brink, which was that's another thing as well, is discovering what was my musical sound. That's something which I would say any aspiring composer watching this, there are a few things I would ask them to take note of. One, first off, learn the business side, learn how contracts and networking work, and then secondly, network. Go out and meet people. Don't just sit on your butt writing emails hoping it's going to come in. You need to get off your butt and go and meet people at networking all the time. And thirdly, is why would they choose you? What kind of music are you doing which makes you unique? And I discovered many years ago, randomly for a game I did for Microsoft, that I quite liked working with world musicians. We discovered a love of, I worked on a game called Kung Fu Chaos in 2003, which had, first time we'd ever really enjoyed working with live Chinese musicians. Because the game was set in a dojo in China when players travel across to New York. So the music kind of evolved, kind of more like from funk to funk disco, from more authentic Chinese music. So trying to work out how the music would go along this journey was fascinating. And working with these Chinese and other foreign musicians.
And that comes through as well. You mentioned one of your favorites there, Midsummer Night's Dream, because you've got influences in there from South America, from Africa, from the West Indies as well, and how you combine all those. So it's interesting what you say about you developing your sound, because whilst I, from the outside, can detect threads through your sound, the actual scope in terms of breadth is substantial.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you're right. It's like any business. I am effectively like a graphic designer or web designer. I'm a creative service provider. Why would you pick someone to do your website over someone else? Why would you pick it? Money is obviously an important thing, but take money out of the equation. Then what makes the work that they've done particularly resonate with what you're after? And it's the same through music. Now, of course, you then sometimes, it's also the interesting point where sometimes you're asked to turn to things which you don't have any experience of. You mentioned the work we did for Green Street 3. So I'd never written an 80s synth score before. And this is before 80s was considered cool. And I was like, and I literally thinking to myself, it's not set in the 80s. People have got mobile phones in this film. Why am I doing an 80s score? The director, bless him, he was absolutely right. It to sound really, really good. But I was a teenager in the 80s, so I can definitely, at one point, I could recite every single track in the top 30. But so I knew the genre well, but it's also, I'm being honest with yourself as to what you think you could do. If someone would, I came into it, I'd like a drum and bass or a very much more electronic score, I don't think I'm the right person for this. I like mixing my particular thing is I like finding unusual combinations of instruments. Some of them are traditional instruments, some of them are instruments, and trying to bring it together. I think that's something which I learned as because I think learning to write music from through gaming proved to be an unorthodox way of doing it, because there were because every few years, not so much these days, but every few years, a new set of machines will come out, consoles generally, and if you will, to the next generation. The PlayStation, the obvious one to do, from PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And as the technology increased on every generation of console, various technical barriers which were in the place of the earlier one would then fall away. Another new technical barriers would appear. But all along the way, it felt like you had a lot more creative freedom to experiment with different musical ideas. And that's a particular joy doing.
And the flip side of the coin of your successes, what are can you remember one or two moments of the opposite, the fails, the putting your head in your hands and thinking, oh no, that have also formed and developed you as you've gone along?
Oh, absolutely. I mentioned failing to get into film and TV. It was, if you do tend to learn more from success as failures. And I pitch on a lot of things and don't get them. I mean, I'm lucky if I get probably 10% of the projects that I pitch on. And sometimes you think, oh, well, that would have been a very good one to have won. That would have been really, really chased as one to one. And sometimes you listen to what they've done, you're thinking, well, I'm not really sure I agree with this. But it's the whole beauty of the creative art, creative craft. You have no idea the direction you're going on. I started playing a game, sort of reminded me of the weekend. It was a very good game to play from about 20 years ago called Dragon Age. I actually pitched on it back in the noughties and didn't win it. So it's interesting to see 20 odd years later what they went for was how different it was from what you delivered. So I mean, you find yourself in some ways trying, because the thing is, when you've got like a page of A4 or a little video to work on, you're trying in many ways to kind of read between the lines as to because quite often, unless you're musically trained, unless you have to give me some musical references, i.e. MP3s, SoundCloud, Spotify links, or whatever. You can't. It's very hard to describe which one musically. And at the same time, sometimes people end up imprinting their own musical tastes onto what they think is suitable for the project, even though it actually isn't. So you find yourself in many ways trying to navigate this. And at the same time, I want to bring some of myself. I mentioned I love writing with random instruments. Therefore, if I can push a client in that direction, because I think I love doing it, and B, I think it'll work for the project. It's all this. But it's interesting that this is it's all done negotiation and understanding the pitch process. Nothing to do with music itself.
But I think this has been fascinating. I would love to delve more and understand more. But I think that there are some real key takeouts from this for me, but also for anyone listening thinking, I've got the musical talent, I've got the drive, I really want to try and make a career out of this. And I've particularly taken 4 things I would say away from this conversation for them to think about. The first is, obviously, you've got to continue to develop the musical talent, but you need to develop the technical talent as well. So lift up the technical abilities to match the musical ones, number one. Secondly, the business of creativity, the business of music. You get your head around that and start turning yourself into a business person as well as a musician. The third thing I think was the importance of networking here. So important. Get out, see people, shake hands, say hello, have conversations. And the fourth that you brought alive at the end of there is developing your sound. So when people ask or listen to what you can bring, you've got something that you can hang your hat on that's distinctive for you. And I think those 4 points alone are worth anybody who's starting out their music career to bear in mind and develop. So, Bon, thank you so much for joining us, for unwrapping your career, for the stories, but also the advice, the difference between yesterday and today. And I would suggest to anyone who is listening to this to go to abmusic.uk and have a listen to some of Bon's work as well. And if you ever ask him for work, make sure you do your spelling correctly in your emails or letters. Bon, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business, or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.